Before we jump in, I'm just going to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Yael Mazor, and I'm the Director of Audience Engagement at CommonWealth Beacon. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us here, and thank you for being engaged and part of our larger community. I'm going to take a moment here just to introduce our executive editor, Michael Jonas. Some of you may already know him, some of you may have already worked with him. But even though I personally feel that he's a man who needs no introduction, I'm happy to introduce him. Michael Jonas is the executive editor of CommonWealth Beacon and works with editor Laura Colarusso in overseeing CommonWealth Beacon coverage and editing the work of reporters. His own reporting has a particular focus on politics, education, and criminal justice reform. Michael has worked in journalism in Massachusetts since the early 1980s. Before joining the Commonwealth staff in 2001, he was a contributing writer for the magazine for 2 years. His story on Boston youth outreach workers was selected for a PASS, Prevention for a Safer Society, award from the National Council on Crime and Delinquency. His Commonwealth work has also won awards from Capitol Beat for state government coverage and from the New England Newspaper and Press Association for work in several areas. For 15 years, Michael wrote a weekly column on local politics for the Boston Globe. He has also worked in broadcast journalism, including in the late 1980s, serving as a co-producer for the AIDS Quarterly, a national PBS series produced by WGBH in Boston. Before we jump in, I just want to do a quick poll. We were curious to know of the folks on this webinar, and we have nearly 100 right now, and we're expecting nearly double that. We want to do a quick poll to find out what your experience with CommonWealth Beacon's opinion section has been. We'd love to know how many of you have already submitted to CommonWealth Beacon and how many of you have actually been published before. So give us just a moment and we're going to do a little poll. So you should see on your screen right now a poll where you can answer the questions. Have you ever submitted an opinion piece to CommonWealth Beacon? And have you ever been published in CommonWealth Voices, which is our opinion section? Okay. So it looks like most of you have had a chance to respond. We'll give it just one more moment. Okay. Thank you to everybody who participated. What we see here is that about 60% of you have never submitted an opinion piece to CommonWealth Beacon. So it's exciting, welcome. And 40% of you have. And about 33% of our attendees have actually been published in CommonWealth Voices. So this webinar today is a conversation with Michael to learn about what that process is going to look like and to ensure that you know the best practices of what we are looking for. So without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Michael.
Thanks so much, Yael, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here with you all to talk a little bit about kind of the ins and outs of our opinion section here at CommonWealth Beacon. Uh, as I think most of you know, we are part of a larger nonprofit organization, Mass Inc. We've been around for almost 30 years. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary this spring, and stay tuned for lots of events around that milestone. So our opinion section welcomes well-written and well-argued commentary pieces on issues facing Massachusetts. Our name, Commonwealth Beacon, comes from the fact that our coverage area and domain is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And our opinion section is interested in vigorous civil debate that helps readers better understand issues. And I'll sort of say in particular, we're looking for opinion pieces that challenge people's thinking on an issue or their preconceived views on something. So before I get into a little more discussion of the sort of do's and don'ts, as we're going to call them, of what we're looking for in opinion pieces, what sort of things work well, what sort of things are not what we're looking for, I'm just going to go over the real nuts and bolts of how one goes about submitting a piece. So to start with, if you go to our homepage, you will see in the top banner toward the side, opinion. If you click on opinion, that will bring you to the landing page for our opinion section. You'll see a red tab for submitting an opinion piece, and that will bring you to a form you fill out. We've found that having pieces come in through this portal helps us sort of better organize and keep track of things than having them just come in directly to one of the editors here by email. So I'd encourage people to use the portal. I know there's always a little bit of apprehension, and people think these things go off into a black hole, but rest assured they don't. They really do land, and we're reviewing them as they come in. So please use the opinion portal. So I'll just sort of uh, dig in now to sort of some of the questions you might have about what we're looking for, what we're not looking for. So we've kind of organized these into sort of set of do's and don'ts. So sort of to start with, I would say this may be sort of presumed by many, but we find, given the sort of range of pieces that land here, that it's not something. It's a point that seems to not be taken by all, which is have a clear point to your piece. We get pieces that often range across a lot of interesting topics, but it's a little challenging then to figure out what the single point is, um, and to sort of help you with that question, think about whether you can kind of boil it down to a single sentence or even further into a headline. We as editors end up being responsible for writing headlines, but feel free to put a suggested headline there, which is, sometimes we'll even take cues from that. But I think even beyond that, it's a very good exercise to help you figure out if you've got a piece that can be distilled clearly into a single point. It's hard to write a piece of 7, 8, 900 words that makes a lot of different points. Generally, an op-ed is making a single point, so keep that in mind. Another point I would sort of say to emphasize is make sure you're focusing on something that is in play in Massachusetts. It should be an issue that is in debate or under debate here, and is not something that it needs to sort of answer the question of why this, why now. So I want to say that with this point, as with a lot of them, there's always some qualifier on this, and so by that I mean, do we run pieces that have sort of a national sweep to them? Yes, we do. But generally speaking, your chances are better if it's an issue that really has a Massachusetts focus to it. And when I say in play, that means it should be something that's timely. But I would also say you want something that's timely, but not too timely. And by that, I mean, occasionally we'll get pieces that are hooked around an event that's happening the day after tomorrow. That is a tough thing for us to turn around and get published quickly. Um, so you want it to be timely, but if it's something that really needs to run before an event takes place, make sure that event or that moment that you're hooking it around is not just tomorrow or the next day. Even the more lead time you have, the better the chances are going to be that we're going to have time to consider it and get it into the rotation. Um, Write clearly so that a smart but not expert reader can follow your argument. This is also really a judgment question. It's hard to tell you exactly what that means. Sometimes people refer to it as I've heard all sorts of things, the Aunt Martha test or the cousin Joe test. So think about someone in your life who may not be an expert in the subject area that you're writing about or submitting a piece on, but they're a smart, engaged follower of public events. Could they read this piece and follow it, all the way through and understand where it's going? you're not writing for the people within the world of this subject. You're writing for a broader audience of our readers who we think are engaged and smart folks in Massachusetts, but you cannot assume that they're experts in this topic. Um, uh, you want to state your point early. This is also something that I think gets lost on people as they're writing. We find that sometimes people build toward their conclusion. Um, there's a certain logic to that, but it really doesn't work for an op-ed. You don't want to wait till the last paragraph to say the point of it. This is not a suspense novel. So you want to uh, say early on what the whole point of this thing is. You're going to then back that up, as the next point says, with arguments and facts that support those. But you don't need to follow this kind of linear path of setting out a whole bunch of facts and then say this therefore leads to conclusion X. Um, you want to say early on your main point. Um, in making the argument and including facts, I think the digital age has provided a little breathing room for people to include facts, but not get always so bogged down with having to detail them all. So you can link to places that will give people, more depth on a particular point, but piece itself needs to include enough facts there uh, to again have people be able to follow along and be persuaded without going into all the links. The links are really kind of a for further reading type thing. And I would just say, as with sort of any new technology or new way in, I think sometimes there can be too much of a good thing. So I would encourage you, if you're including some links, think about some really key documents or source materials that people might go to. Don't send a piece in that has 20 links. It's sort of sometimes I think people include them and it feels like it's a little bit sort of the student trying to impress the teacher with all the background reading they've done, but it's going to sort of bog down the piece and be a little distracting to readers to see links like 3 links in every other sentence. Um, so those are kind of the basics of it. I mean, the other thing that I would just sort of say, along with having a clear point, and this again, hopefully is clear to people, is don't be boring. You know, this is an effort to draw people in to your topic, make your argument. So you want to engage people quickly, and you need a topic that has some edge to it or a little bit of tension at play. So I think those are kind of uh, the key elements of what you want to do. Another point I'd make that I think is not always doesn't always show up in op-eds we get, and that is, and it's a little counterintuitive, but at some point, and it's not an absolute that you always want to do it, but it can strengthen your argument if you allow readers to sort of have a sense of what the counter argument is. Sometimes people refer to this in op-eds as the to be sure paragraph, and that doesn't mean that it necessarily has to begin with the words to be sure, but it's sort of conveying this idea that along with the thesis that you're laying out, you want to sort of acknowledge that there is another argument here. There's another side to this story, and it can strengthen and make your argument sort of land more strongly with readers if you say, yes, there are folks who disagree and they say X, Y, and Z. Then obviously you want to sort of take a chance, take the opportunity to not only present what that is, but then sort of essentially knock it down or say why you think your argument still is the one that should win the day. Um, in doing that, I'd say, don't be, I guess, don't be cute. Don't sort of set up a straw man argument. Don't have the counter. Don't go to the weakest, most peripheral part of the argument of the folks on the other side. I recently saw someone say, and forgive the dated sexist gendering here, that instead of a straw man argument, use a steel man argument. You know, bring out what you think is maybe one of the strongest arguments with the other side. And then again, if you're confident enough of your argument, you still can kind of go directly at it. And so don't sort of, try to go around the argument from the other side. Try to go right at it and go through it. So those are sort of some of the do's. And now I think we're going to jump to what we would call the don'ts, or things to avoid um, in 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 uh, in thinking about an op-ed. So, um, sort of a corollary of the do to have a piece that has a single point to it is, don't submit a piece that is so broad that it lacks a clear focus. Um, Again, that should be a given, but we get a fair number of pieces that just people are just dying to talk about climate change, or they're dying to talk about the plight of public education in Massachusetts, and they start sort of, going from, soup to nuts in touching on all the kind of issues at play within those fields. That is not a piece that's gonna land well in our portal and find its way into publication. So make sure that that it's not something so broad. Um, Sort of another corollary of that, I would say, is make sure that this uh, point you have is not one that virtually no one would take issue with. And this is sort of not an uncommon problem with pieces that we receive, which is uh, the piece is well presented. It talks about an issue that is maybe in play, or a timely topic in education, in healthcare, in something related to housing. But when you sort of boil it down, they're not really making a point that anyone would argue with. Like, we need all kids to learn, and our schools should ensure that they all can. Um, it's just hard to see that as an op-ed. It's more of a rallying cry, and that's not something that really works as an op-ed. Um, so we're not. There needs to be some tension in the piece, and there needs to be a point you're making, some action that needs to happen specifically that can advance the argument. Um, you want to write the piece, or I should say, this is an error. Don't write for insiders who know the issue well. Um, uh, as I said before, you want it to sort of land and be able to be understood by an average smart reader. Avoid the alphabet soup of tons of acronyms. And then finally, don't wait until your last paragraph to make your point. That is, again, as I said, something that happens too often. And uh, make it early, but when you get to the end, you may restate it again in a way. So those are some of the kind of clear don'ts. We thought it'd be helpful to sort of break this down by going through some examples of pieces that we've recently published that do a good job on these elements. And so I'm going to just sort of go through a few very recent pieces and talk about some of the points there that made them work particularly well. Um, I also just want to mention, I know the invitation said this, that you'll see at the bottom of your screen a place marked Q&A. So I am going to shortly will turn to some question and answers. And so feel free already, if you've got them, to queue things up there by submitting questions that you have about something about the op-ed process, or other issues you want to raise. Um, so, so I'm going to begin by talking about actually the piece that we ran just on Sunday. On Sundays, we send out a piece to our subscriber list that is really our featured commentary piece of the week. We send it out by email in addition to it being posted on our website along with all the other opinion pieces. So this piece that you see in the top there, Boston's in the corner, first one listed, Boston's broken land use system blocks the homes we desperately need. Um, this piece uh, is interesting because it touches on an issue that in some ways is kind of an evergreen topic. So it in some ways is not a fresh new topic, but it's an example of a kind of enduring question or problem that has been in play, but it brings it to the fore with kind of some fresh context and nuance to it. So this is a piece basically about Boston's zoning system. And before everyone nods off, as sometimes zoning topics can do to folks, just understand that Boston is sort of notorious, even nationally, for having this Byzantine system of zoning regulations that require many projects to have to go through a review process and get a zoning variance. So it's long been seen that this is an impediment to, kind of having sensible, robust development, an issue that's never been more kind of urgent than in this time now when we're kind of incessantly hearing about the need to build more housing to address the housing affordability issue. So this writer, John Infranca, who's a professor at Suffolk Law School, um, basically sort of breaks down that issue, but he does it by talking again concretely about a recent example in Jamaica Plain of a project that just got sort of, put through the ringer, he would say, by kind of neighborhood opponents. And the result of it was that it ended up, as often happens, reducing the number of units of desperately needed senior affordable housing there. And and so he talks about it in a very concrete way that brings this issue, it has a timely current hook to it. He also, in a way that also I think makes this piece work really well, talked about the fact that Mayor Michelle Wu really campaigned on this issue and talked about needing to, end this system of endless sort of one-off permitting of housing. And so she even put out a report that he quotes from, when before she was mayor, fixing Boston's broken development process, a system of special approvals driven by influence that disadvantage those without resources. Um, and yet he says that now, after a full term, he writes, this is again his opinion, that the administration has done little to move the city away from this system. So it had a lot of elements that made the piece. It certainly had tension in it. It certainly talked about something that has some urgency to it. So it worked super well. The other thing I'm going to point out about this piece, and there's another piece on here, the piece by Eric Schwartz about colleges that you see there, the third piece over, is that both of them do a really good job of starting the piece with a strong lead. Um, we all know that, all this talk about how increasingly fleeting attention spans are. And, um, and so I think that, it makes all the more important the question of how you open your piece. And so both of these, I'm just going to point out, did a really good job with that. So in Franca's piece, and you can sort of link to these pieces here on the screen, but you don't need to. I'm just going to read to you his opening line. 30 low-income seniors recently lost potential housing, but 10 mature trees will survive. So it's obviously a provocative line in which he's kind of basically arguing that sort of NIMBYism and opposition in that neighborhood ended up favoring trees over seniors in desperate need of low-income housing. Um, it's provocative, it's his opinion, but it certainly, you get the point of where he's going very quickly. Um, then the piece by Eric Schwartz on colleges similarly has a really strong opening. America is falling out of love with college, and it's not hard to see why. Eric goes on to really unpack that and gets to an interesting point, which is not just that college has become too expensive or there's sort of growing anxiety about where you go with your degree, but he makes a really interesting point or argument, which is that he thinks colleges need to marry kind of academic learning with as he calls it, an experiential learning revolution or kind of practical work out in the world much more than they do. It's a little bit along the lines of the Northeastern University co-op system. He argues that that really needs to sort of take hold across higher ed. So it also worked super well. His lead was really strong, but he's also sort of at the very first slide, I said, try to challenge people's preconceived ideas or views they may have. And I think his piece does a really good job of that, of saying, maybe we need to rethink sort of higher ed in the 21st century in a very fundamental way. So it does that. I would also point that the piece here in on education does a similarly good job of kind of challenging preconceived ideas. It's a piece about um, kids falling behind. It's about the achievement gap. It's about a lot of issues in K to 12 education that we see a lot of pieces on. But this piece by Monica Bowman, who formerly was a member of the Cambridge School Committee, what I thought it did well was it sort of called out in an interesting way this idea that both the left and the right are kind of failing children. There's been a lot of talk about the Trump administration really loosening federal oversight of special ed and all sorts of guardrails that we think of the federal government imposing to try to, backstop and ensure educational rights and access, especially for the most vulnerable kids. She makes the point that in some ways, whether it's kind of the loosening of our, graduation requirements through the vote on MCAS or other things, there's been also a backlash against those things from the political left. So she had I thought, a pretty provocative piece, kind of saying that sort of education is kind of being sort of cast out on its own by both the political left and right. So that worked really well as a piece that was provocative, that challenged assumptions. And then the last piece I'm just going to quickly mention, and then we're going to turn to Q&A, is the piece on energy that we just published last night. It's an argument saying that solar energy holds sort of answers to some of the problems with energy affordability, as well as kind of it's something that can help us address climate change. And the reason that I'm kind of bringing this one out is that it didn't arrive with all the elements in place, and in particular, it had a point where it's talking about the need for reforms at the state level that can make solar uh, projects more viable and more affordable. And it had a short paragraph saying that red tape is around approvals is slowing down the installation of solar and costing, you know, estimated to, add a few $1,000s to every solar installation. And the point that I'm going to make here is that in some ways they were maybe trying to not bog the piece down too much in the weeds, which is an important point to do. But there's a fine line between not bogging it down in the weeds and not really backing up your argument with facts. So I sort of went back to them and said, you really need to, this argument that red tape is sort of slowing things down and adding to the cost is a bit it sort of falls in that category of like don't make an argument that no one would take issue with. I mean, there's no real, committee for the preservation of red tape. Nobody's in favor of it. It's a pejorative term that sort of suggests sort of senseless, unnecessary, bureaucratic hoops. So I went back to them and their piece is stronger because they now outline what some of the exact procedures are that they're saying we could reform. And they're also acknowledging kind of under that category of the to be sure, like give at least some credence or standing to what the arguments are. I mean, they make the point that it's not, it doesn't enhance safety or quality, the bureaucratic permitting steps that they want to get rid of. I mean, there was obviously at some point, as with so many things, these measures were put in place based on some good intention that they make sense. I think they make a pretty good argument now that original justification maybe no longer really holds. They also go on to talk about kind of a smart permitting technology that was developed by the Department of Energy and that is in place in more than 300 communities around the country. So they give some concrete examples of how this, what had been just a paragraph saying, and let's get rid of all the red tape. They tell us what the red tape is and why we really could clear it out of the way and get to a better place. So those are sort of, I think, some more, hopefully that's helpful to have these concrete examples. Then the last thing I'll say, which fittingly has to do with kind of the last word in op-eds, is to think about how your piece ends. And there's not an exact prescription for it, but I would just say, have it land more with a flourish than with a thud. And, you know, don't have it end with, therefore, the legislature should pass this bill as soon as possible. That is not, not very compelling. And I'm gonna again go back to these couple that I mentioned that I thought had really good leads by John and Franca and by Eric Schwartz, because they both ended really well. And the ending of these, it's not that different really than the kind of basic structure of an essay that I think we all learned in, I don't know, was it middle school or junior high, that you kind of, state your thesis, have, the body of it supporting it with evidence, and then kind of have your conclusion restate the thesis in some way. I mean, that really is sort of the recipe for op-eds too. So John and Franca's that, talked about how Boston's convoluted permitting process has really slowed uh, affordable housing, despite it being a goal that everyone claims they want to, that they have. He then ends by saying the housing crisis is not inevitable. It is the direct result of choices made in hearing rooms and zoning meetings, choices to privilege trees over people, a reference back to his lead, and process over progress. If Boston wants to live up to its ideals, it must choose differently. So again, a strong way of ending. It really, ties it in a bow by kind of, going back to sort of his opening line about what happened in Jamaica Plain, the sort of focus or the example he uses. Eric Schwartz ends his piece with, again, a nice reference that is sort of rooted in Massachusetts. He's talking about a need for, or a call for, kind of what he calls this experiential learning revolution in higher ed. That really is another example of something that, applies. I think his argument would apply nationally, but he really roots it here in Massachusetts. And he does a good job at the end by saying, I often refer to Boston as the Silicon Valley of social innovation. That description has been well earned over the centuries. Now we face a new crisis around the declining efficacy of one of those innovations, higher ed, and we need to lead the nation again in an experiential learning revolution, a set of solutions that help more young people become the leaders we need and the fulfilled adults they want to become. So again, I think, if you look to those pieces, I think it'll give you a really good roadmap for the makings of a good op-ed. There's obviously, a lot of other different ways to go at it. There's not a complete cookie cutter recipe that always works, but these are really strong examples, I think, of what we're looking for. So with that, I think we will start to take questions. And so if you haven't already and you have a question, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And I see we've got a good number already in there. We may have more than we can get to. I'll try to go quickly to get through as many as we can before we have to end in about 25 minutes.
Okay, so thank you to Michael for giving us such a great overview. Thank you to those of you who've already submitted those questions. I just want to remind you all, if you're not actually subscribed to Commonwealth Voices, our Sunday newsletter, I highly encourage you to subscribe. I'll send you an email after the event with a link to subscribe if you haven't already. But again, want to say thank you for coming and for sharing your time and your thoughts with us. So the first question we got from Michael is what is the word count range that we are looking for?
Great question. I will give a range, but I'll also sort of say it's one of these things that there's always exceptions to it. But in general, I think sort of 700 to 900 words is a good way to think about it. I mean, that is typically sort of what a newspaper op-ed is, and for good reason. It's usually enough room to unspool a good argument without boring people or going on too long. With that said, I always say that sort of the 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 digital age and the fact that we're only online now is kind of both a curse and a blessing when it comes to this kind of issue, and that is that in the old days, on a newspaper opinion page, they've got a space for each submission, and that piece has to fit in that space. So that is going to dictate the word count, in a pretty definitive way. We don't have that limitation. And so the blessing is that there are pieces that sometimes need a little more space to be fully unspooled, and we can do that since we don't have to fit things into a space here online. Um, the curse of it is that sometimes people go on too long. So I would say think about 700 to 900 words, 700 to 1,000 words in that range. I mean, but with that said, I always say, take as much room as you need to make your argument, but not more. So we don't need a lot of filler stuff. We don't need a lot of what sometimes in journalism or writing people call throat clearing, the first paragraph or two that sort of give flowery setting of the scene or talk in real generalities about a topic before you get to it. So I think that, hopefully that answers the question.
Well, here's a clarifying question somebody asked. Is it best to submit adhering to the word count initially or to write more fully and be ready to receive edits?
Uh, I appreciate the question because it raises sort of some other points that I'd like to make. I would stick with the word count. Again, unless you feel strongly that you've got, a piece or a story to tell that requires that, it's always going to work to your advantage if there's less for us to have to do to get it into shape. Uh, I recently got from a good writer who's done pieces, but the whole piece they wrote this time kind of got away from them, and they submitted something that was several thousand words, and they said, tell me where I need to cut, and I ended up having to sort of park that piece for sort of several weeks before I got back to them to say that it needed it just needed to be cut by 2/3. So you know try to land it within under 1,000 words, unless you feel like you can make a really strong case for why it should be longer.
Another question that a lot of folks were curious about. The question is about the black hole. How many days or weeks or more can a contributor reasonably expect to get some response to their submission, even if just an acknowledgement of receipt?
Good question. So this is one that I'll confess we're sort of working on potentially changing the procedure, but currently, just because of the volume of pieces we get and the, kind of small, nimble staff we have, um, we get pieces, and generally, if we're interested, you will hear from us within, I would say, 2 weeks. I think we generally will glance at them, and if there's something that seems to make it more urgent, in terms of a time factor, we'll try to figure out more quickly. But generally, you know, in general, you should submit a piece that still could run, in a week or even two. Again, there can always be exceptions, and we certainly are interested if there's some, event or recent news that calls for that you have a commentary piece on. We'll try to, we can certainly try to get things into print or publication, I guess I should say, more quickly. But it could take a couple of weeks. And at this point, at least, we don't really, if we're interested, you'll hear from us within a couple of weeks, I guess is the short answer.
Here's another question. Who is your readership, and are there often op-eds on pending bills in the legislature?
This is a great question, and it touches on a point that was sort of in my notes of things to talk about in the first part of the presentation, but there was sort of felt like there were too many points to get through. So our audience, we often think of as kind of a set of circles. We focus on Massachusetts, policy and politics. So we think that the people at the center of that world are, kind of in particular paying a lot of attention to CommonWealth Beacon, both our news reporting and opinion section. So that means folks on Beacon Hill, people in local government. Um, but 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 our readership is broader than that, and so it's not a definition that may satisfy people because it's a little hard to say who that is. But I kind of refer to it as the engaged citizenry. In other words, our pieces are not, although we want them to read well and be written well, they're not necessarily breezy, short, quick, whimsical reads. They're kind of meaty, substantive pieces taking on topics in Massachusetts life. So if you think about the people who are drawn to that, we like to think that that's our readership. So it's again broader than just the kind of inside Beacon Hill crowd, but it's folks who tend to pay more than an average amount of attention to those issues. In terms of things pending in the legislature, it's a really good question. Um, and on this one, I kind of have to give a more nuanced answer, which is we really don't want pieces in general that are basically a call to pass, H Bill 305 on Beacon Hill. Sometimes we get pieces like that, and the problem I have with it is that we're trying to engage people and draw people into understanding or engaging with an argument or a debate around an issue. And so, I feel like a piece of legislation is usually a specific answer to a question or an issue that's at play. So you can certainly talk about a bill being a concrete way that there's an effort now underway to try to address a problem, but it should be more than just a call for that bill. And also, the way it's written, needs to include that legislation as part of your argument, but the piece needs to be broader than that, and it also can't read. I mean, I'll say we have literally had some pieces that, when I kind of gave these examples of really good endings to pieces, this is an example of an ending that I would put at the other end of the spectrum of exactly what we don't want. We've had pieces that say, and therefore, please contact your lawmaker and urge them to vote for H Bill 305. In other words, the writer in this case really confused what we do and what an op-ed or opinion section is with the piece read like a kind of email that an interest group would send to its membership. Let's rally and get this bill passed on Beacon Hill. We're not really here to play that function. That's what those, internal communications do. So short answer is certainly talk about things that are in play on Beacon Hill, but it can't read like a rallying of the troops behind a bill.
Another question about scope. Is it more effective to choose topics that are more Boston specific, Massachusetts specific, or New England federal? What's the scale of what we're
Yeah.
looking for?
Yeah, good question. I mean, so again, I would just point people back to our name, Commonwealth Beacon, which is uh, a reference to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So, you know, Massachusetts wide is really probably the 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 real sweet spot. We're trying to have pieces that would be of interest to readers, across the state. So that sort of begins to answer a little bit the question about Boston, and the Boston conundrum is one we are often faced with, which is we really are not, the Boston Beacon, and we are very mindful. Our offices are here in Boston. We try to be very mindful of the kind of Boston bubble, or the sense that Boston sort of sucks up all the oxygen in terms of news coverage. So with that said, and you might be saying, well, what about that piece you just ran Sunday about Boston zoning? Uh, it doesn't mean that we won't run pieces that have to do with Boston, but I think we are mindful that our audience is across the state, and so we run those pieces. We try to do it sort of judiciously, or with some sense of balance. By the same token, I think I said earlier in the presentation, we're not primarily interested in issues at play nationally or internationally. Does that mean we never will run a piece that really addresses that? I'd say no, we certainly will. So, if there's a way you can connect it more closely to something in Massachusetts, that's going to work better. Um, but our job is really to help people understand issues in Massachusetts, and to be a forum for a really kind of healthy, vigorous debate around issues facing Massachusetts.
You. So we had a couple of questions about the kind of content, media links that we're putting into the stories. Are we open to embedding additional media, photos, video, graphs? And how many links would be too many in a submission?
Yeah, we're open to sort of any of those. If there's some particularly compelling photo that helps to sort of, illustrate the op-ed, and we'd be open to that. We want to make sure that you have the rights to that, or that we have the right to publish that photo. That's an important point that people need to be aware of. Similarly, like a graph, if it really helps enhance people's understanding, then yeah, you know that would be great. And
Thank
links,
you.
I think I mentioned earlier,
Mm.
having some links in a piece can be helpful, and I think it's good for people who want to sort of dig in more deeply. But again, don't overwhelm readers, or sort of try to wow them by having 30 links in a piece. I think you know there's no magic number, but I don't know. I would think half a dozen is enough. I mean, find the five or six key sources or places that you think people might want to go to understand this issue, sort of in more depth.
Okay. A couple of folks were asking, what topics do you wish more people would submit pieces about? Are there topics you'd like to cover but have not done for one reason or another?
That's a great question. We do get pieces. I feel like things go we have kind of a rush of pieces. I mean, we in certain areas, and we don't have them in others. Um, you know, we don't get a lot of pieces that I would say relate to sort of the economy, um, business concerns, um, employment. Those areas, I think we're really a little bit wanting in, and we'd welcome more pieces on that. We get a lot of pieces on energy and climate. We get a lot of pieces on education. Um, we don't get as much on higher education. I mean, that piece by Eric Schwartz was really great to have, because it did touch on that. We get, a lot of our, I think, audience is our folks concerned with or focused on K to 12 policy. So I think more things on higher ed uh, would be great as well. Um, but and I guess one other thing that it's a little tricky is we don't have as many things on local municipal government issues, and here I just want to caution that we're not really interested in a piece is that is so particular to a particular town or a debate or a battle going on there that it's something that would appear in a local publication there, if there is such a thing. Sad to say, there are fewer and fewer of those. But if it's something that can talk about something happening in a particular community, but it can be broadened out to sort of, that it's generalizable, I guess, to other communities, that this is an issue that other cities and towns are dealing with. That's a great topic, and I think, our pieces tend to have more of a statewide Beacon Hill focus, and so things that talk about the challenges at the local level are always welcome, and we'd probably be particularly welcoming of more of those.
We had a few questions about jointly written op-eds. So I'll just say we do publish those all the time, but is there a preference about the solo versus jointly written op-eds?
No, I would say, we're fine with m multiple authors. I think, like with anything, it's sort of within reason. I think I know we had a piece that had three or four recently, and that's really, I think, pushing the outer edge. I think, five, six co-authors is just starting to uh, be too sort of unwieldy. And at that point, to be honest, it starts to feel a little bit more like it's like sort of a coalition that, again, send that out to the kind of folks on your organization or the coalition's email list, and you want to sort of have them know that all these different folks are kind of behind an issue. It's hard to really take a piece with five authors and think that they all really meaningfully, contributed to it, frankly.
Another couple of questions about clarifying how we're defining what's in play. Folks have noted that a lot of our op-eds are about education or healthcare. They're, things that are perennially in play. But there are lots of issues that this commenter is saying should be in play, and it's difficult to get the legislature to focus on that. And similarly, somebody else was talking about general looking at history. History generally doesn't get discussed, how we got here, analysis. Is there an approach where we talk more broadly about,
Yeah,
what's not part of, Beacon Hill's agenda?
a good question. So, I get that there's something about, the kind of closed loop. If you can only write about things in play, then, what about the things that somebody wants to sort of scream about, the need for it to be taken seriously on Beacon Hill. So, I guess I should have, again, qualified when I said things in play a little bit. And so I think making a strong case about something that is just getting ignored certainly would be a good, potential topic for us. And we're not going to sort of say, well, I mean, in other words, we're not, Beacon Hill leaders are not the gatekeepers for us determining what we will run or what qualifies as an issue that needs attention. And in fact, sometimes, a key part of such a piece might be sort of an argument, kind of a rant at Beacon Hill for ignoring something. So again, take that in play a little bit more broadly. Um,
Couple of
and
couple of
and just the last thing
quick.
about history or other things, it also brings up a point, which is, again, I kind of laid out, I think, the kind of nuts and bolts of what a lot of our pieces, uh, the qualities they have about something in play, making an argument. There should be some tension. We need something that there's kind of another side to it. Those are kind of the hallmarks of kind of a classic standard op-ed. But in terms of kind of historical perspective, we love those, frankly. Again, we've had a lot of those over the years, and And I would say they kind of fall into another category that we really didn't discuss, which is an essay. So these terms are a little arbitrary, but we've occasionally, and we recently had an essay. I will sort of just mention it if you want to look it up by Imari Perry's Jeffries, who's the CEO of Embrace Boston, the nonprofit that's responsible for the MLK Coretta King Memorial on Boston Common. And he wrote a piece about kind of how the poor, are kind of always seem to be the ones that, are kind of expendable or whose fortunes and lives are kind of the collateral damage or are played with when fights happen in Washington, because he talked about how SNAP benefits were kind of held hostage during the government shutdown. He talked about what's happened with Medicaid in the whole big beautiful bill, and he kind of tied it back to the war on poverty. And so anyway, I guess that's another example of, for all the kind of rules I've kind of laid out, I just want to emphasize that it's not an absolute. They're not hard and fast. I would say Amari's piece, there was not a particular issue in play in Massachusetts. He did not make an argument that we therefore need to do X, Y, and Z. It was really more of an essay, but I thought he did it in a way that was really compelling, that brought in some history and then talked about that history in a way that made some sense, or tried to put some recent controversial issues in that context. So it worked well. So there's an example of something that I think falls a little outside of what we've been talking about as a standard op-ed, but it was written well and it was engaging and it had a lot of the other qualities that really carried it.
Great. We have a couple of just more policy questions here. Um, is there a policy for how often a given writer or representative from a given organization can be published?
Um, I, I would say the short answer is no, but it's not to say that we're not sort of mindful of that. So um, I guess that's all I can say. I mean, we don't want to run things over and over from the same organization or person, but there's no hard and fast, rule we have that says, no more than one or two paces per year from organization X.
Thoughts about working with PR reps versus authors themselves?
This is a great question. Now, I may get myself in a little trouble here because I have seen the RSVP list. I know there are a lot of PR people on here. Um, I'll just say it as directly as I can. I'm more inclined to take pieces that come directly from authors. It's not that I don't love and respect all of my friends in the PR world and know a lot of folks and have worked with them. I mean, I think but I'll be honest that when things come in from PR shops, I think our antenna goes up, sort of wondering clearly, like, sort of what's the play here, and is this, sort of, is this spin mode in some way? I think when I hear directly from an author, I'm always glad to have them reach out directly. Um, so. I guess that's the short answer. We're happy to get them from all sources. We run a lot of things that come from communication shops, but by no means do I. So I don't want to discourage people from doing that, or those shops from submitting things. But if the person asking or people out there are wondering, do I need to go find a place to sort of submit it on my behalf? Absolutely not. Just reach out directly.
So I know we're at time, but I think we might have time for about two more questions
Sure.
if we can. Someone asked, and that they know and appreciate the firewall between Commonwealth Beacon and Mass Inc., the publisher of Commonwealth Beacon, and we have wholly separate work from them. But for those of them who work with the Mass Inc. policy team and want to raise those issues in a submission, are there any particular guidelines or things they need to be aware of when working with both sides, sort of the shop?
So I guess is the question from people who may have had some working relationship or worked with people in the
Hmm.
Sync Policy Center. So it's a good question. I think as Yael has tried to explain, we are a little bit of an unusual animal in that we are a independently operating, journalistic enterprise, but we are based within this larger nonprofit. of MassInc, which has a research policy side, which does a lot of research and puts out reports on issues affecting life in Massachusetts. So we're really on parallel tracks. They're doing research and policy on a lot of the issues that we write about in Commonwealth and that we have opinion pieces on. So I guess again, this might be a little bit of a frustrating answer, but the fact that you're submitting something on an issue that they have worked with, neither certainly does not disqualify the piece, but it's also not going to kind of make it an automatic that we're going to, push to the front of the line or publish it. Um, you know, we, we are interested in pieces that springboard off research that's done by other policy centers in Massachusetts as well. And we try to sort of treat pieces that have some connection to or reference to MassInc research in the same way.
Michael, this is a question about the podcast. How are topics decided, and do you accept pitches?
A great question. So this is a little bit sort of something that sort of sits next to the opinion section. It's not strictly speaking part of it, but we have, as I hope people know, and if you aren't aware of it, look on our website and become a listener to the Codcast, which is our weekly podcast. Um, uh, we're always glad to have pitches for topics or guests or people. This is sort of a case where I don't think you would use the submission portal. You can email me or the other editor here, Laura Colarusso. You could also, if you look on our website, Jennifer Smith, reporter here at Commonwealth Beacon, is kind of the person who sort of quarterbacks the Codcast most weeks. So any of us you could reach out to with topics or suggestions for guests.
Great. Technical question. How long do op-eds stay on a prominent location on the website? Are they removed after a certain amount of time?
Good question. So if you look at our homepage, there's on the right side is the opinion slot, and there are several. Ooh, this is going to now embarrass me because I'm not sure how many exactly. Maybe Yael can tell me. There are three? Okay. So there are three pieces there, and I mean basically the pieces stay there and they start to get pushed off of that as new pieces appear. Um, I'd say in general, we aim to sort of have a new opinion piece every weekday. So it would go on, say, on a Monday, and on Tuesday it would move down a slot on Wednesday. So it's, 3 days or so roughly. It does then go, if you follow it, to a sort of landing page where opinion pieces are. And I think that answers the other question of does it disappear? No. I mean, this is again the kind of great and scary thing people say about the internet. It will live forever. And so you can go back and read opinion pieces from years ago. They're all there on our website once you kind of get off the homepage into the search function.
I apologize, we didn't have time to get to all of the questions, but I think we got through most of them. Thank you to everybody who came out today. Thank you, of course, to Executive Editor Michael Jonas. We will be publishing this video and putting it up on our YouTube channel. If you have other questions and want to follow up with Michael, please do so. We thank you for your support and appreciate your engagement with Commonwealth Beacon. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, folks.